Welcome to Financial Insider Weekly. I'm your host, Michael Gray, CPA. My guest today is Mark Erickson. And Mark is a family law attorney. His firm is located in Campbell, California. Graduated with a JD degree, law degree, from Santa Clara University School of Law in 1979. Was admitted to the California State Bar and U.S. District Court, Northern District of California in 1979. After working for another attorney, mostly in the areas of civil and business litigation from 1979 to 1984, he founded his law firm in 1985. He became a certified family law specialist by the Board of Legal Specialization of the State Bar of California in 1987. He has lectured and presented seminars for many groups, including as a teaching assistant and guest lecturer at the Santa Clara University School of Law. Mark has two adult sons. One of his sons is a lawyer and has been working with him for about 4 years, so hooray for that, Mark. And today, Mark and I are going to be talking about how to choose a good divorce lawyer. And I want to mention that interviews with Mark about various divorce topics, divorce-related topics, are posted under past episodes in our website, financialinsiderweekly.com. So we've really got quite a collection there. Okay, Mark, thanks again for joining me today.
Thanks for inviting me.
Okay. All right. So I'm somebody that's looking for representation in a divorce. Will any lawyer do?
Probably not. I would say that when I first started practicing 36 years ago, there were a lot of general practitioners that did a little bit of everything. Mm-hmm. And I know some of my first trials were against general practitioners, and they were very good. You don't see as many attorneys today that do a little bit of everything. And I would speculate that perhaps the majority of attorneys that practice in the divorce area limit their practice to that or primarily family law.
Okay. Okay, well, gee whiz. Internet, that's the thing these days, right? We do our Google searches and so forth. Do you think that doing an internet search is going to tell me the best divorce lawyer?
I think that most people today at least use the internet somewhat, even if I think a lot of the people who come to see me, it's mostly referrals, but they often don't know what the source was, and so it may have been a friend looking on the internet, or somebody made the referral, and then they go to the internet to try and confirm who you are, where are you, and get a little bit more information. But if you have no leads whatsoever, I think I'd be cautious just looking on the internet. Somebody said the other day, isn't everything on the internet true? and everybody chuckled, and you can't believe everything you read on the internet. And so there's certainly a lot of information about attorneys on the internet, some of which is probably helpful, maybe not all of it. And I still see that some of the best, I'll say more experienced older attorneys, you'll barely find them on the internet. And it's probably a lot more prevalent with the younger, newer attorneys.
All right. So what about rating services like Yelp? Are those much help?
I think some of the rating services are good. I think you have to be cautious on Yelp. I've looked, and sometimes I'll see an attorney I've never heard of that has a tremendous number of positive reviews, and I just guess that they may have a lot of friends and relatives that subscribe to Yelp and put the reviews up for them.
Sort of like stuffing the ballot box in.
Yeah, exactly. And the same thing with some of the best lawyers. If you look at Yelp, you won't even find them on there. And I think that some of the negative reviews probably are, I'll call them a false negative, where perhaps it's an adverse party that's upset that the attorney that represented their adversary maybe did a good job and they're not happy, and so they'll write a bad review even though they're not reviewing their own attorney.
Okay. Um, so, what sort of suggestions do you have for finding a good divorce lawyer?
Well, going back to the rating services, there are certainly some rating services that I think are reputable and have been around for a long time. For example, Martindale-Hubbell goes back, I think, into the 1800s, and their ratings are based upon surveys of experienced attorneys and judges. They're confidential ratings. And so it's very difficult to get a high rating unless you really have a good reputation with your peers and with the judiciary. And so I think if you see somebody that has what's called an AV rating, which is the highest rating, both in ability and ethical standards, you can rely on the fact that at least that attorney's peers think highly of them. And a BV rating, for that matter, is very good. And I think it takes a while for some attorneys to even get a CV rating, and a lot of attorneys have no rating. Then there's a newer internet, I'll call it an advertiser, called AVO, AVVO. And I would say somebody who really wants to get a high rating on AVO, if they work at it, they probably would be able to get it once they understand what it takes to show, as far as your own information, to get a high rating. So I wouldn't say that's as reliable as, say, a peer review rating like Martindale-Hubbell, but it tells you something, that at least somebody's made an effort to try and improve their standing in the legal community. There are others that you'll find on the internet that I'm not sure how reliable they are, but I think a lot of these services that are out there, it's really an attorney rating themselves, which is probably not quite as reliable as a peer review rating.
I see. So, and I guess like California State Bar Association and other state bar associations, they have some sort of lists related to people, at least that you can check their credentials to see if they're certified.
Yes. So, of course, the State Bar of California has its own website where you can look up any attorney by name and get some information, and it will state whether they're a certified specialist in some field of law, give their current address, and whether they have any disciplinary records. So that's easy to find. The state of California has a certification program where an attorney can become what's called a certified family law specialist, and there are a number of fields of law such as criminal, taxation, estate planning, quite a few different areas, and it's a very difficult certification to achieve. It requires an attorney to take a difficult examination, like a special exam, like a bar examination within the scope of that field. You have to meet some very extensive education requirements. You have to pass peer review, have no disciplinary record, and then you have to recertify every 5 years. So it's a big deal. In the area of family law, and there are literally thousands of attorneys practicing in Santa Clara County, but I'm going to estimate there are approximately 100 certified family law specialists. So if you're looking for an attorney and they are a certified family law specialist, or for that matter looking for an attorney in another area of the law, if they are certified as a specialist by the State Bar of California, you at least know that they know what they're doing.
Okay. So what are some things that you would look for when evaluating a family law attorney?
Well, if I was walking into somebody's office, and I'll tell this to people who come in to interview me if they're going to interview other attorneys, know something that you think they should know. So if you've interviewed attorneys and they've identified some peculiarity of your case and informed you of what the law is, maybe by a specific family code section, when you interview the other attorneys, if, for example, they're not a certified specialist, you might test them to see if they have that same information and they're able to tell you about that area of the law effectively. And if they can't, that might tell you something about their qualifications and experience. So that's one thing I would do. I always tell people to interview a number of attorneys, unless it's an emergency. Of course, in so many areas of the law, people wait until it's an emergency and they need an attorney immediately. But if you have time, and most people have some time, I would interview 3 or 4 attorneys that you know in advance are qualified, and then make your decision based on that. One of the things I think I would also do is go in there prepared with questions. A lot of people will come in with 100 questions that they've printed off of some questionnaire on the internet. That isn't necessarily helpful. Starting out with what's your date of birth, and where did you go to law school, and where did you go to high school. But having some information in advance, usually you can find out quite a bit about the attorney you're interviewing in advance before you go into their office.
Okay. So when we're talking about family law and divorce and so forth, are there like subspecialties?
Yeah, absolutely. There are family law attorneys who limit their practice to much narrower areas of the law. For example, there are attorneys who only draft orders for retirement plans, so dividing, say, a defined benefit or a defined contribution plan, your 401k, and other tax-deferred plans like IRA accounts. So even when I'm handling a case, often if there's a retirement plan, it's usually referred to a neutral third attorney that does that drafting. There are some attorneys that won't take child custody cases, so they'll only handle the financial aspects of a divorce or post-divorce proceedings. There are some attorneys that only handle child custody. There are some attorneys that don't like to handle domestic violence proceedings, so they might exclude you as a client if you came in and that was a part of the fact pattern in your dissolution case.
Well, okay.
So those are things you might want to pre-screen before you go in to see the attorney. You might ask whoever answers the phone, are there issues the attorney doesn't handle that so you know in advance you might be wasting your time going in to see that lawyer.
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. So maybe isolating, some of the key issues for yourself and say, okay, well, is this something that this person might be interested in handling? So, okay, well, when you have an initial consultation, are there going to be fees involved?
I would say most attorneys charge for an initial consultation. There are some who don't. Some will charge their full regular hourly rate, which in family law these days is probably going to be maybe a minimum of $250 an hour, and there are some now probably over $600 an hour and just about everything in between. Some will give a set fee but put some time limitation on an initial consultation. So that's something you'd want to know before you went in, so you could budget and decide, do you really want to pay somebody $500 or $600 an hour and go in there for a 3-hour consultation when all you're doing is trying to decide, is this somebody I might be interested in hiring? So it's clearly something you'd want to know. There are also referral services. The Santa Clara County Bar Association has a lawyer referral service where for some fixed nominal fee, they'll set you up for an initial consultation with a finite time frame within which it needs to be concluded.
Okay. Let's see how we do. Okay, well, what if I want to limit the issues that are handled by the lawyer?
Yes, so this is maybe a newer development in the law. When I first started, if you took a divorce case, you handled every aspect of it. But we now have what's called limited scope representation, where you can hire an attorney to only handle a certain aspect of your case. So you may have a divorce case where you want to save money and you think you're able to resolve the financial issues, but you have a child custody dispute, so you could hire the attorney only to handle the child custody aspects. And that would require preparing a special form that's filed with the court, so the court knows that your representation is limited to that issue, and the other side, or the attorney on the other side, realizes that you're only handling that limited part of the case. Or sometimes people will hire several lawyers, so they may have one lawyer that's handling the child custody aspect on a limited scope, and another attorney perhaps handling the financial issues.
Cast of thousands?
It could be. Yeah, it's not always two attorneys when you go to family court.
Wow. Scary. All right. Well, what sort of fee arrangements should you expect when you hire a divorce lawyer?
Okay. I would say that the days of the old fixed rate fee for a divorce are pretty much gone. I haven't seen it or heard of it for years. There may be some attorneys out there still doing that. Almost every attorney is going to bill an hourly rate for their time, and so your final bill is going to be a function of how much time does the attorney devote to your case. And most attorneys are going to want something called a retainer at the beginning, which will be a lump sum that usually would go into the trust account to cover future billings. As I said before, hourly rates are all over the place, but I think right now in family law, the predominant range is probably in the upper 200s to $500 an hour type range. No attorney can tell you in advance what it's going to cost, because the attorney doesn't really know what they're getting into. No matter how much information you give them, you can't predict how the other side is going to react to the situation. I always say a case that appears to be very simple can turn out to be complex and highly litigated, and very complex cases sometimes are resolved because both sides are cooperative, the attorneys cooperate, there's a full disclosure of information, and a negotiation process that works smoothly. So it's not always easy to predict the outcome. I think the best an attorney could do is give you a range of potential outcomes, or a best guess, which might not be worth much.
Uh-huh. So every client knows is that when they come in, their case is simple, right? No big deal. This is a quickie divorce.
People want it to be, but surprisingly, I find a lot of people who think their case is very complicated. It turns out it isn't, and the folks that think their case is simple, it turns out it's not.
Yeah.
Because sometimes they don't recognize the issues at the outset that they're going to run into, some of the claims that they don't realize exist that could be a big deal.
Yeah. I can only sort of analogize, because when I get new clients that come in, almost all of them say, "Oh, a simple tax return, no big deal." Okay. So should the agreement with the attorney be in writing?
Yes, the law requires that any time that the attorney's fees are expected to exceed $1,000, the agreement must be in writing. And so you definitely want to make sure you have a written agreement. My practice is I tell people to take the agreement home, read it, make sure they understand it, they ask any questions first, and do the same with other attorneys they might interview, so you know what your commitment is and what the attorney's commitment is in advance. And most attorneys will have an agreement that spell out in detail the responsibilities of the client and the attorney. Something new I've added to my agreement the last few years is having the client write right on the fee agreement an email address that we can use, that they've authorized us to use, because you're often concerned about the privacy of email for attorney-client privilege purposes. You certainly want to dissuade people from using their email address at work, which is not private. or an email address that their spouse may have access to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. Is the breadwinner required to pay all of the fees for both attorneys?
No.
Darn.
I think that's a misconception. A lot of people think that it's automatic that the working spouse is going to be responsible for all the fees. And that kind of goes to the concept of community property, that once people separate, the earnings and accumulations of a spouse from their employment or self-employment are their sole and separate property. And so you have no interest in the separate property of your spouse. However, the court can look at separate property for payment of things like child support, spousal support, and attorney's fees. So to answer your question, it is not automatic that the higher earner or spouse with greater wealth will pay the other side's fees, but that greater wealth and greater income is a factor the court can consider. So courts have the authority to make attorney fee orders based on need and ability to pay. So certainly if there's a huge disparity in income and assets, there is a risk to the higher earner or the wealthier spouse that they will be required to pay all or a portion of their spouse's fees and costs. Courts also have the ability to make fee orders as sanctions or punishment for bad conduct during the case, such as failing to disclose things that you are required to disclose, like your income and assets.
Uh-huh. So the answer is sort of maybe, I guess.
Yes, discretionary with the court.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because, well, obviously there's an issue for the person who's not working, or if a person is not working, you know, what resources do they have? How are they going to pay these fees?
That's often a big issue at the outset of a divorce case, because someone gets served with a dissolution of marriage petition, and they find out that their spouse has emptied the bank accounts, taken their name off the stock accounts or wherever their liquid assets are, and now they have no money for anything, let alone hiring an attorney. So certainly in those instances, you would expect the court to make an order that funds be made available to that spouse, not only for their own support, but for at least an initial award of attorney's fees and costs. So we have a level playing field, and that's kind of the idea of the law. Is it would be unfair if one side was able to take all the resources, hire an attorney, and preclude the other side from having an equal opportunity to be represented.
Wouldn't want to be Warren Buffett's wife.
Right.
There's a little difference in resources there. Okay, well, I guess that sort of answers the question. So if I don't have the money to pay the attorney, then I need to go to the court and ask for help, I guess.
Yes, and if the money's there and the other side is controlling it, you would expect the court to exercise their discretion and make an order that the spouse controlling the money would make that money available, or order them to directly pay their spouse's attorney.
Okay. So we have a few minutes left, so about 3 minutes. So maybe you can throw out some final thoughts for when somebody is looking for an attorney, things to think about and so forth.
So I guess being a certified family law specialist, I have a bias in favor of the specialization program, but I don't think everyone needs a specialist. Certainly younger folks that say you have a short marriage, you don't have children, you have equal incomes, it may very well be that it is a simple matter, and I sometimes tell people that come in to see me that it would be overkill to hire a certified specialist in their circumstances. But if you have greater complexities, such as arguments about what's separate property versus community property, date of separation arguments, a long-term marriage where you have a significant potential dispute over spousal support, business assets in particular create complexities in divorce that require somebody with experience. And certainly if you have a case that you think is likely to go to trial, which is very few, but if they do, or you have a pending case that looks like it's going to trial, you want to make sure you have an attorney that's experienced, that knows how to present a case at trial. And surprisingly, I don't think the public would realize how few cases go to trial, and there are a lot of competent lawyers out there that probably have never been to trial.
Wow, yeah. Okay. So I appreciate you being here and coming and sharing some of this information with us. And this is an important decision that people have to make. I think another thing to think of, though, this is what was in the back of my mind, is how do you like this person? Is this a person that you think that you can work with?
That's clearly part of the evaluation, is their communication style. Is this somebody that you think you would work well with if you were in a stressful situation and had to make an important decision quickly, at court right before a trial and offer's made? Is this somebody you feel like you could rely on to help you make a well-informed, rational decision?
Right. Okay, Mike, well, thanks again.
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate your input here. Folks, hope that you have found this information to be useful. You may know somebody that's even going through a divorce and they're looking for some ideas on how to look for a good divorce lawyer, and we'll have this interview posted online. And you go to Financial Insider Weekly under past episodes and you'll be able to find it there. Thanks again for joining us, and I'll see you next time on Financial Insider Weekly.